Ma'am, step out of line. You're being detained.
For what? Checking my watch while standing in a CVS?
Don't argue with me. Give me your ID. Now.
You don't have reasonable suspicion, and if you touch me, you're breaking the Constitution.
The security cameras mounted in the corners of the CVS pharmacy on 4th and Main didn't have audio, but the high-definition video was crystal clear. It captured every second of the incident that would eventually be studied in law schools across the country. It showed the fluorescent lights humming over the aisles, the elderly customers shuffling toward the counter, and it showed Officer Kyle Miller making the single most catastrophic assumption of his life. He had no way of knowing that the woman standing in line checking her watch with a look of mild annoyance was the Honorable Eleanor Vance. He didn't know she had spent the last 25 years on the federal bench dismantling organized crime syndicates and preserving the sanctity of the United States Constitution. All Officer Miller saw was a black woman in a trench coat standing near the pharmacy counter, looking at her phone, and in his mind, that didn't look right. Eleanor Vance wasn't nervous. She wasn't casing the joint. She was 62 years old. Her husband was recovering from hip surgery at home, and the pharmacy was taking far too long to fill his pain medication. Eleanor shifted her weight, the heel of her sensible leather boot tapping against the linoleum. She was tired. It was 2:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, and she had just come from a morning session at the district courthouse where she had denied bail to a man accused of wire fraud. She wanted nothing more than to pick up the hydrocodone for her husband, go home and make a pot of tea. She held her prescription slip in one hand and her iPhone in the other, checking her email for a clerk's draft opinion. She was completely absorbed in the text of a Fourth Amendment brief when a shadow fell across her phone screen. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of line." The voice was young, authoritative, and tight. Eleanor didn't jump. She didn't gasp. She simply looked up, sliding her reading glasses down the bridge of her nose. Standing a few feet away was a uniformed police officer. Officer Kyle Miller was 28 fit, with a high and tight haircut and a posture that suggested he was ready for a fight. He had been on the force for 4 years and had recently been assigned to a task force targeting prescription fraud rings in the metro area. The briefing that morning had been vague watch for people loitering, people on phones coordinating with others, people who looked out of place. To Miller, Eleanor looked out of place. "Excuse me," Eleanor said. Her voice was the same one she used to address unruly defense attorneys, calm, resonant, and laced with steel. "I said step out of line. We need to have a talk." Miller said, his hand resting instinctively near his belt thumb, hooked over the leather. He didn't draw his weapon, but the threat of force was implicit in his stance. "I am waiting for a prescription for my husband," Eleanor stated, holding up the paper slip. "I have been standing here for 15 minutes. I am not stepping out of line and losing my place." Miller stepped closer, invading her personal space. This was a tactic he had learned in the academy, established dominance force compliance. "Ma'am, you've been observing the counter and checking your phone repeatedly. That matches the profile of a spotter for a fraud crew. Now step away from the other customers, or I will assist you." The other customers, mostly seniors picking up blood pressure medication, began to turn around. The pharmacy was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerators and the murmur of the pharmacists behind the glass. Eleanor felt the eyes of the room on her. She knew exactly what this was. She had written opinions on Terry versus Ohio. She knew the standard for a stop and frisk. She knew what reasonable suspicion looked like, and looking at a watch while black was not it. "Officer," Eleanor said, turning her full body to face him, her posture straightening to her full height of 5'9". "You are detaining me. For a detention to be lawful, you must have a reasonable, articulable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot. Checking the time and reading an email while waiting for a slow pharmacist is not criminal activity. It is the behavior of a busy citizen. Now, unless you can articulate a crime, I suggest you let me pick up my husband's medication." Miller blinked. He hadn't expected a lecture. Most people stammered. Most people got scared. This woman was talking down to him, and that triggered something ugly in his gut. He interpreted her confidence not as innocence, but as the arrogance of a career criminal who thought she knew the system. "I don't need a law lecture from you," Miller snapped, his voice rising loud enough for the back of the store to hear. "I need ID. Now, hand it over." "I am under no obligation to provide identification unless I am being lawfully detained for a specific crime," Eleanor replied. She wasn't being difficult for the sake of it. She was holding the line. She was a guardian of the law, and she refused to let it be trampled in a CVS aisle. "Am I under arrest, officer? You're about to be..." Miller threatened, stepping within striking distance. "You're interfering with a police investigation." "I am the investigation, apparently," Eleanor retorted coolly, "and it is a baseless one." The air in the pharmacy grew heavy. A woman in a floral dress near the greeting cards aisle pulled out her phone. She held it up, the red record light blinking. Eleanor saw the phone and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Good, she thought. The record is essential. "Last chance?" Miller said, his face flushing red. "ID now." "My identification is in my purse," Eleanor said slowly, telegraphing her movements. "I am happy to show it to you to clear up your confusion. But I want to be clear, I am doing this under duress, and I am formally stating that you lack reasonable suspicion for this stop." She reached into her leather tote bag. Her movements were deliberate. She bypassed her wallet initially and touched the leather casing of her federal credentials, then paused. No, she would give him her driver's license first. Let him dig his hole. She pulled out her state ID and held it out. Miller snatched it from her hand. He didn't even look at the name. He looked at the address, an upscale neighborhood, one of the most expensive in the city. "This your real address?" he scoffed. "Or is this a fake?" "It looks like a fake." "It is a valid government-issued ID," Eleanor said. "Run it." "I'll run it when I'm good and ready," Miller said. "Right now, I want to know who you're texting. Who's the supplier?" "I am emailing my law clerk," Eleanor said, her patience thinning by the nanosecond. "About a suppression hearing regarding a warrantless search, roughly similar to the one you are conducting right now." Miller laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. "Law clerk. Right. And I'm the police commissioner. You know, you people always have a story. It's always, I'm waiting for a ride or I'm buying medicine, but you can't stand still. You're twitchy." "I am twitchy, as you call it, because my husband is in pain and I'm being harassed by a public servant who evidently skipped constitutional law day at the academy," Eleanor said. The insult landed. Miller's eyes narrowed. "Turn around," Miller commanded. "Excuse me. Turn around. Hands behind your back. You're detained. I'm checking you for weapons and stolen scripts." "You will do no such thing," Eleanor said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming the voice that had silenced courtrooms for 2 decades. "You have no probable cause for a search. You have no consent. If you touch me, officer, you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights. And you are opening yourself and this city up to liability that will bankrupt your department." "Stop resisting," Miller shouted, reaching for her arm. "I am not resisting. I am stating the law," Eleanor said, pulling her arm back instinctively. That was all Miller needed. In his mind, she had pulled away. That was resisting. That was physical obstruction. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it sharply behind her back. Eleanor gasped in pain, her shoulder straining. The gathered crowd gasped with her. "Hey!" a man in the back yelled. "She didn't do anything." "Back up!" Miller yelled over his shoulder, struggling to control a 62-year-old woman who was barely fighting back. "Everyone back up or you're all going to jail for obstruction." He shoved Eleanor against the shelf of vitamins. Bottles of vitamin C and fish oil rattled and fell to the floor. "You want to play lawyer?" Miller grunted, grabbing her other wrist. "You can play lawyer in the holding cell." "Officer," Eleanor said, her face pressed against a row of Centrum silver, her voice strained but unbroken. "I am going to give you one opportunity to stop. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am a senior judge for the United States District Court. If you click those cuffs, you are ending your career." Miller hesitated for a fraction of a second. A judge, number judges, were old white men. Judges didn't shop at CVS in a trench coat on a Tuesday. Judges didn't talk back to cops. They worked with cops. She was lying. It was another hustle. "Tell it to the judge." Miller quipped a line he had heard in movies and always wanted to use. He slapped the handcuffs on. The metal ratchet sound echoed through the silent pharmacy. Click, click. "You are making a grave mistake," Eleanor whispered. "The only mistake was you thinking you could run a scam in my sector," Miller said, pulling her upright. He grabbed her by the bicep hard. The woman recording the video moved closer. "I have this whole thing, ma'am. I have it all." "Thank you," Eleanor said to the witness, maintaining her composure despite the humiliation of being manhandled in public. "Please capture his badge number. Badge 492, Officer Miller, San Diego Police Department." Miller marched her toward the door. Eleanor walked with her head high. She did not struggle. She did not scream. She knew that any physical resistance would be used to justify his aggression later. She had to be perfect. She had to be the model plaintiff. As they passed the counter, the pharmacist looked over, wide-eyed. Mrs. Vance, your prescription is ready." "Keep it for me, David," Eleanor called out calmly as she was shoved through the automatic doors. "I'll be back for it after I handle some business at the precinct." The automatic doors slid shut behind them, cutting off the cool air of the pharmacy and pushing them into the harsh afternoon sun. Miller opened the back door of his cruiser and pushed Eleanor inside. The plastic seat was hard, unforgiving. She maneuvered herself as best she could with her hands bound behind her back, her shoulder throbbing where he had twisted it. Miller slammed the door. He walked around to the driver's side, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He felt good. He had taken down a suspect who thought she could talk her way out of it. He got in, started the engine, and pulled out into traffic. The drive to the precinct was short, maybe 10 minutes. For the first 2 minutes, silence reigned. Miller glanced in the rearview mirror. He expected her to be crying. He expected her to be begging him to let her go, offering bribes or screaming threats. Instead, the woman in the back seat was staring out the window with a look of intense concentration. She wasn't looking at the scenery. She was looking through it. In her mind, Eleanor was already drafting the complaint. Paragraph 1, jurisdiction and venue. Paragraph 2, the parties. Plaintiff Eleanor Vance, a citizen of the United States. Defendant Kyle Miller, acting under color of law. She memorized the timestamps. She replayed the conversation verbatim in her head to ensure she wouldn't forget a single word. "I don't need a law lecture." Matches the profile. Miller cleared his throat. The silence was unnerving him. "You know, if you just cooperate, it goes easier," he said, trying to regain the psychological upper hand. "Just tell us who the leader of the ring is." "I am invoking my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent," Eleanor said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "I will not speak to you further without counsel, although I suspect I know the law better than any counsel you could provide." Miller gripped the steering wheel tighter. Why was she so calm? Why did she sound like that? The phrase senior judge popped back into his head. He shook it off. Impossible. She was just a good liar. But a seed of doubt, cold and sharp, began to root in his stomach. He replayed the interaction. The way the pharmacist had called her Mrs. Vance. The way she had produced her ID immediately. The quality of her clothes up close, that trench coat, looked like cashmere. He glanced at the computer terminal in his car. He hadn't run her name yet. He had been so focused on the arrest. He decided to wait until booking. The sergeant would sort it out. If she was a judge, well, she shouldn't have been acting suspicious. That was his logic. It was flimsy, and he knew it. They arrived at the precinct. Miller parked in the sally port. He hauled Eleanor out of the car. Her wrists were chafed. "This way," he muttered. He led her through the heavy steel doors into the processing area. The smell of bleach and stale coffee hit them. It was a familiar smell to Eleanor, but usually she smelled it from the other side of the bench or during facility inspections. Never as a prisoner. Sergeant Frank O'Malley was behind the booking desk. O'Malley was 58, 2 years from a pension, and he had the weary look of a man who had seen every variety of human stupidity the city had to offer. He looked up over his reading glasses as Miller brought Eleanor to the counter. "What do we have, Miller?" O'Malley asked, reaching for a clipboard. "Interfering with an investigation resisting disorderly conduct," Miller recited. "Suspected prescription fraud spotter. Picked her up at the CVS on 4th. O'Malley looked at Eleanor. He looked at her boots. He looked at her coat. He looked at her face. He frowned. He had seen a lot of junkies. He had seen a lot of fraudsters. This woman looked like she was about to chair a board meeting. "Ma'am," O'Malley said politely, "I'm going to need to take your personal effects." "Of course, Sergeant," Eleanor said. "My purse is with Officer Miller." Miller dropped the leather tote onto the counter. "Check it for extra scripts. I bet the bottom is lined with them." O'Malley opened the bag. He didn't dump it. He reached in. He pulled out a wallet. It was Yves Saint Laurent. He pulled out a smartphone. He pulled out a distinct leather folio. He opened the wallet to get the ID. He stopped. He stared at the card in the clear plastic window. Then he reached into the bag and pulled out the leather folio. He flipped it open. The gold badge of the United States Judiciary glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights. The ID card next to it read, Eleanor Vance, United States District Judge, Southern District. O'Malley froze. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly shade of gray. He looked at the badge. He looked at Eleanor. He looked at Miller, who was leaning against the counter, looking smug. "Miller," O'Malley said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Yes, Sarge. Find the stash." "Take the cuffs off," O'Malley said. "What? Why, she's—" "I said take the damn cuffs off right now." O'Malley roared, slamming his hand on the desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The entire booking room went silent. 2 other officers stopped what they were doing. Miller jumped. "Sarge, she—" "Miller, you idiot!" O'Malley hissed, holding up the leather folio. "Do you know who this is? This is Judge Vance. Federal court. She puts people away for life. She signs the warrants you pray for." Miller stared at the badge. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The air left his lungs. Judge. Federal judge. The words bounced around his skull, colliding with the memories of the last 20 minutes. The manhandling. The handcuffs. The "tell it to the judge" line. His stomach dropped through the floor. Eleanor stood perfectly still, her hands still bound behind her back. "Officer Miller," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "I believe the sergeant gave you a direct order." Miller's hands shook as he reached for his key. He fumbled, scratching the metal against the cuffs before finally getting the key in the hole. He turned it. The cuffs sprang open. Eleanor brought her hands forward. She rubbed her wrists. There were red, angry marks where the metal had dug in. She looked at them, then looked at Miller. "Sergeant," Eleanor said, turning her attention to O'Malley, "I want the watch commander down here, immediately, and I want the chief of police on the phone. Do not process me. Do not put me in the system, but do not think for 1 second that this is over." "Yes, Your Honor," O'Malley said, grabbing the phone. "Right away, Your Honor. Please have a seat. Can I get you water, coffee?" "I don't want water," Eleanor said. "I want to preserve evidence. Officer Miller's body camera. I want the footage pulled and secured before he has a chance to turn it off or accidentally delete it." I wouldn't," Miller stammered. He looked small now. The aggressive posture was gone, replaced by the terror of a child who had broken a priceless vase. "You have the right to remain silent, Officer Miller," Eleanor said, turning her gaze back to him. "I suggest you use it." Within 3 minutes, the room was full of brass. Lieutenant Harris, the watch commander, arrived breathless. He took one look at Eleanor, recognized her from a high-profile case the previous year, and looked like he might vomit. "Judge Vance," Harris said, stepping forward with his hands raised in apology, "I cannot express how sorry I am. There has obviously been a terrible misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding, Lieutenant," Eleanor said. "There is a violation of civil rights. There is an unlawful detention. There is an assault, and there is a kidnapping. Your officer arrested me for standing in line." "We will handle this internally immediately," Harris promised. "You are free to go, of course. We can have a car take you home, or back to your car. I am not leaving until I have a copy of the incident report and the case number," Eleanor said. We haven't filed a report yet, Your Honor," Miller whispered from the corner. "Then you will write one," Eleanor commanded. "Right now, you will write down exactly what your probable cause was. You will articulate in writing under penalty of perjury why you put hands on me. And if you lie, Officer Miller, if you deviate 1 inch from the truth that the video cameras captured, I will have you charged with perjury in addition to deprivation of rights." Miller sat at a desk. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely type. He looked at the screen. What could he write? Subject looked at watch. Subject had attitude. It all looked ridiculous in black and white. While Miller typed, the captain of the precinct arrived. He had been at lunch. He had run 2 blocks. He was sweating. "Judge Vance," he gasped. "Please, let's discuss this in my office." "I have nothing to say to you in private, Captain," Eleanor said. "Everything that needs to be said will be said in a federal complaint. I am filing suit against this department, against the city, and against Officer Miller personally." "Judge, please," the captain pleaded. "This will ruin the department's reputation. We can work this out. We can terminate him. We can—" "This is not about one officer," Eleanor said, her voice rising so everyone in the room could hear. "This is about a culture that allows a young man with a badge to look at a 60-year-old black woman buying medicine and see a criminal. It is about the fact that if I were not a federal judge, if I were a housekeeper or a teacher or a nurse, I would be in a cell right now and no one would care. I would be resisting. I would be a statistic." She grabbed her purse from the counter. She checked to make sure her credentials were there. "I want the digital files of the body cam and the dash cam sent to my attorney by close of business today," she said. "If they are corrupted or lost, I will assume spoliation of evidence and I will instruct a jury to infer the worst. Do we understand each other?" "Yes, Your Honor," the captain whispered. "Good day, gentlemen," Eleanor said. She turned and walked out of the precinct. She walked straight into the bright afternoon sunlight. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She called an Uber. While she waited, she called her husband. "Ellie," his groggy voice answered. "Did you get the meds?" "I'm on my way, honey," she said, her voice softening. "I had a slight delay, but I'm coming home." She arrived home, gave her husband his medication, and made him soup. Then she went into her study. She sat at her mahogany desk, surrounded by leather-bound law books. She pulled out a fresh legal pad. She uncapped her fountain pen. She began to write. 3 days later, the lawsuit was filed, Vance versus City of San Diego et al. It was a masterpiece of legal writing. It alleged violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments. It alleged false imprisonment, assault battery, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. But the real bomb dropped when the video footage leaked. The woman from the pharmacy had posted it to TikTok. It had 10,000 views in the first hour. By the time the lawsuit was filed, it had 15 million. The nation watched Officer Miller twist the arm of a grandmotherly figure. They heard her calm, terrifying warning. They heard him dismiss her. CNN ran the clip every hour. Fox News debated the compliance aspect, but even their legal analysts admitted Miller had no probable cause. The NAACP issued a statement. The ACLU offered support. The San Diego Police Department was under siege. The internal affairs investigation, usually a slow process, moved at light speed. They pulled Miller's file. They found a pattern. Over his 4 years, Miller had stopped black women 400% more often than white women. He had a history of attitude arrests charges that were later dropped. But nobody had ever checked. Until he arrested a judge. The conclusion was inevitable. 6 weeks after the incident, Kyle Miller was called into the chief's office. He was terminated for cause. He was stripped of his badge and gun. The union didn't even fight for him. The video was too damning. But Eleanor didn't settle for a firing. She pushed the lawsuit. She forced the city to depose the chief. She forced them to reveal their training manuals, which showed a woeful lack of implicit bias training. The city settled 9 months later. They paid Eleanor Vance $1.2 million. It was the largest settlement for a single wrongful arrest in the city's history. Eleanor didn't keep a dime. She established the Vance Legal Defense Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to providing top-tier legal representation for indigent women wrongfully accused of crimes. Miller left the state. He tried to get a job in security in Arizona, but a simple Google search of his name brought up the video. He was unhireable. He ended up working in a warehouse loading boxes, answering to a supervisor who watched his every move. Judge Eleanor Vance returned to the bench. But something had changed. She sat a little taller. When police officers testified in her courtroom, she watched them a little more closely. When a defendant claimed they were stopped for no reason, she didn't automatically dismiss it. One afternoon, a year later, she sat in her chambers looking out the window. The city looked peaceful from up here, but she knew what happened on the ground. She knew that justice wasn't a guarantee. It was a constant, exhausting fight. She thought about the moment in the pharmacy, the fear she had pushed down, the helplessness that had threatened to swallow her. She thought about the millions of people who felt that every day who didn't have a badge to pull out of a purse. She picked up her gavel. It felt heavy in her hand, a tool of power, a tool of justice. But only if the hand holding it was willing to strike true. She stood up, smoothed her robe, and walked toward the courtroom door. There was work to do.
Manager wants you out. Private property. Step away from the counter now.
I have a reservation and I was told to wait. I haven't been trespassed or asked to leave.
Quit the lawyer talk, hands where I can see them, and show me ID before this gets worse.
My credentials are in my inner jacket pocket. Check them first.
Officer Derek Vance had been wearing a badge for 6 years, and in that time he had cost the taxpayers of Charlotte nearly $500,000 in nuisance settlements. But he was about to break his own record. He was 32 years old, patrolling with the kind of swagger that suggested he believed the law was something he enforced, not something he was bound by. He had a reputation in the precinct locker room as a hard charger, a euphemism that older, wiser officers used to describe a liability waiting to happen. On a bright, cloudless Thursday morning in October, Vance was cruising down Independence Boulevard, scanning the streets for trouble, unaware that he was 20 minutes away from a decision that would end his career and cost the city $4.1 million. The setting for this catastrophe was not a dark alley or a high-crime neighborhood, but the pristine fluorescent-lit lobby of Apex Rentals, located just 3 miles from the international airport. It was 10:15 a.m., and the morning rush of business travelers had largely subsided, leaving the lobby quiet. The floor was polished white tile. The walls were adorned with posters of scenic drives along the Pacific Coast Highway, and the smell of industrial cleaner hung heavy in the air. Standing at the far end of the counter was Marcus Thorne. At 46 years old, Thorne cut an impressive figure. He stood 6'2", wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than Officer Vance's monthly salary, a crisp white Oxford shirt, and a silk tie knotted with military precision. He was a black man in a space that, to some, signaled service worker or driver, but his posture suggested command. He was leaning casually against the high counter, scrolling through emails on his secure government-issued smartphone, waiting for the branch manager to locate the keys to a specific black Chevrolet Tahoe he had reserved weeks in advance. Thorne wasn't impatient. He didn't tap his foot or sigh loudly. He understood logistics. He understood that sometimes paperwork got misplaced. He was a man accustomed to waiting for things that mattered. However, the stillness of his demeanor seemed to agitate the energy in the room, specifically the energy of the man behind the counter. Thorne had already been waiting for 20 minutes, a delay, caused by a computer glitch, or so he was told. He had no idea that his patience was being weaponized against him. He had no idea that a radio call was already bouncing off the local towers, dispatching a patrol unit to investigate a suspicious individual refusing to leave the premises. To anyone observing with an unbiased eye, Thorne looked exactly like what he was, a high-level professional waiting for a rental car. But biases are rarely about what is seen. They are about what is felt. And on this particular Thursday, the feelings of a nervous manager and an aggressive police officer were about to collide with the reality of a man who held a top-secret security clearance and the weight of the Federal Bureau of Investigation behind him. Marcus Thorne was not a man who sought the spotlight. In his 19 years with the FBI, he had never kicked down a door for the cameras or stood behind a podium at a press conference. He was a senior intelligence analyst, a title that carried immense weight within the intelligence community, but meant very little to the average civilian. His battlefield was the digital landscape and the financial spider webs that funded domestic terror cells. He had spent the first decade of his career at the NSA before being headhunted by the Bureau for his ability to see patterns in encrypted communications that others missed. Thorne was in town to coordinate a multi-agency task force regarding a localized threat involving the movement of unregistered firearms across state lines. The rental car, a specific make and model with tinted windows, was a requirement for the surveillance operation he was overseeing later that afternoon. He wasn't carrying a firearm. Analysts rarely did unless they were in a combat zone. His weapon was his intellect, his clearance, and his ability to dismantle lives through federal indictments. He was the quiet professional, the man who ensured that when the tactical teams moved in, they were at the right house at the right time with the right warrants. Behind the counter, watching Thorne with a growing sense of unease, was Brett Sterling. Sterling was 29 years old, the branch manager of this Apex Rentals location. He had been in the job for 8 months, promoted rapidly due to a staffing shortage, and he wore his polyester uniform polo with an inflated sense of importance. Sterling considered himself the first line of defense for the company's assets. He had read articles online about rental car fraud rings of thieves who used stolen identities to lease luxury SUVs and ship them overseas. To Sterling, nothing about Marcus Thorne added up. In Sterling's worldview, black men didn't come in at 10 a.m. on a Thursday wearing $2,000 suits just to rent a Tahoe. They didn't stand that still. They didn't have phone screens that looked like walls of encrypted text. Sterling had asked for Thorne's credit card 3 times, running it through the machine and scrutinizing the name. Marcus A. Thorne. It sounded fake to him. It sounded too generic. The credit card was a heavy metal Amex Platinum, the kind that usually signaled wealth, but Sterling had convinced himself it was a high-quality forgery. "I'm just waiting on the system to clear the authorization code." Sterling had lied 5 minutes ago. In reality, the authorization had cleared instantly. The car was ready. The keys were in his pocket. But Sterling was stalling. He was watching Thorne type on his phone, convinced that the man was communicating with a crew outside, perhaps waiting for a signal to rob the place or force Sterling to hand over the keys. It was a fantasy born of prejudice and fed by fear. A narrative constructed entirely in Sterling's mind, completely detached from the reality of the calm, middle-aged civil servant standing 5 feet away. The mind of a biased individual is a powerful engine for fiction. As the minutes ticked by, Brett Sterling's internal narrative grew more elaborate and more dangerous. He watched Thorne tap his screen. Thorne was actually replying to an email from the assistant U.S. attorney regarding a subpoena, and Sterling interpreted it as a signal. He's getting impatient, Sterling thought. He's checking the time. The crew must be close. Sterling retreated into the back office, ostensibly to check on the vehicle, but in reality to make a phone call that would ruin his life. He picked up the landline and dialed the police non-emergency number, though his voice carried the panic of a 911 dispatch. "This is the manager at Apex Rentals on Wilkinson Boulevard," Sterling whispered, peering through the slat in the blinds. "I have a situation here. There's a male subject in the lobby who is behaving aggressively and refusing to leave." The dispatcher, trained to filter information, asked the standard questions. "Is he armed? Is he threatening you?" "I don't see a gun, but he's huge." Sterling exaggerated, adding 3 inches and 50 pounds to Thorne's frame in his mind. "He's been loitering here for 30 minutes. I denied his rental because his card looked fake and he won't leave. He's making the female staff very nervous. I think he's casing the place for a robbery. He's texting people constantly." It was a cascade of lies. Thorne had not been denied. He had not been asked to leave. There was no female staff working that morning. It was just Sterling and a detailer out back. But Sterling knew the buzzwords that would get a reaction. Aggressive, refusing to leave, nervous staff. He was painting a picture of a predator projecting his own discomfort onto a man who was simply checking his email. "We have a unit in the area," the dispatcher said. "Officers are en route. Do you want him trespassed?" "I want him gone," Sterling said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and adrenaline. "Just get someone here before he does something." He hung up the phone and took a deep breath, feeling a surge of righteous power. He was protecting his store. He was taking action. He walked back out to the counter, forcing a tight, nervous smile. "System is still slow, sir. Just another minute." Thorne looked up, his eyes sharp and intelligent behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Take your time," he said, his voice a deep baritone that commanded respect. "I have a meeting at noon, but I have a cushion." Sterling swallowed hard. A meeting at noon, he thought. Probably a drug deal. The disconnect between reality and Sterling's perception was now absolute. He wasn't seeing a customer. He was seeing a caricature. And he had just summoned a man who viewed the world through the exact same distorted lens. Officer Derek Vance received the call on his terminal at 10:38 a.m. The text on his screen read, "Suspicious person / loitering / disturbance. 4200 block Wilkinson Boulevard. Complainant states male subject refusing to leave, possibly casing business." Vance didn't need more than that. His mind instantly filled in the blanks. In his 6 years on the force, he had developed a policing philosophy that relied heavily on instinct, which was often just a cover for profiling. He visualized a homeless man screaming at customers, or perhaps a gang member trying to intimidate a clerk. He didn't consider that it might be a misunderstanding. He didn't consider that the manager might be lying. To Vance, the call was the truth, and the subject was the problem. He flipped his lights on for a brief second to cut through the intersection, then killed them as he pulled into the Apex Rentals lot at 10:45 a.m. He parked his cruiser directly in front of the glass doors blocking the handicap ramp, a subtle power move he performed without thinking. He adjusted his utility belt, checked the tightness of his tactical gloves, and exited the vehicle. He was ready for a confrontation. He was looking for a fight. Vance pushed through the glass doors, the bell chiming cheerfully above him. The contrast between the bright, sterile lobby and Vance's aggressive posture was jarring. He didn't look for the manager. He didn't assess the scene for safety. His eyes locked immediately on the only black man in the room. Marcus Thorne was still standing at the counter, looking down at his phone. He heard the door chime and the heavy tread of boots, but he didn't look up immediately. He assumed it was another customer. Vance marched across the tile floor, stopping 6 feet from Thorne. He hooked his thumbs into his vest, widening his stance. "Hey!" he barked, his voice echoing off the hard surfaces. "Partner, we need to talk." Thorne looked up slowly. He saw the uniform, the badge, the aggressive stance. He saw the nameplate, D. Vance. He folded his phone and placed it calmly on the counter, face down. "Officer," Thorne said, his tone polite but neutral. "Is there a problem?" "That depends on you," Vance said, stepping closer, invading Thorne's personal space. "Manager says you're causing a disturbance, says you were asked to leave and you're refusing. That true?" Thorne blinked, genuinely confused. He glanced at Sterling, who was now cowering behind the computer monitor, avoiding eye contact. "I haven't been asked to leave," Thorne said, turning back to Vance. "I'm renting a vehicle. The manager told me the computer system was down and asked me to wait." Vance scoffed, a dismissive sound that grated on the nerves. "Yeah, well, he called us. So evidently you're not renting anything. This is private property. If he wants you gone, you go. You don't stand here arguing." "I'm not arguing," Thorne said, his voice remaining level, though his pulse began to tick upward. He recognized the demeanor. He had seen it in intelligence reports about bad policing, but he had rarely experienced it this directly. "I have a reservation. I have provided my credit card. I am simply waiting for the keys." "You're trespassing," Vance interrupted, his hand drifting near his taser. "And now you're failing to comply with a lawful order. I don't care about your reservation. Grab your stuff and step outside. Now!" This is the moment where training and temperament are supposed to prevail. A seasoned officer would have spoken to the manager first, verified the story, or simply asked the gentleman to step aside to clear up the confusion. But Derek Vance was not interested in clarity. He was interested in submission. Thorne knew the law better than Vance did. He knew that trespassing required a prior warning to leave, which he hadn't received. He knew that he had a contract at the reservation that gave him a legitimate reason to be there. But he also knew that arguing the law on the street with an agitated officer was a losing proposition. "Officer," Thorne said, keeping his hands visible on the counter, "there is a misunderstanding here. I am a federal employee. I am here on official business. If you allow me to show you my credentials—" "I didn't ask for your life story," Vance shouted, his face reddening. The mention of federal employee didn't register as a warning. It registered as a lie. Vance had heard every excuse in the book. "I know the mayor. I'm a lawyer. I'm federal. I told you to leave. You're refusing. Now you're under arrest." Thorne stiffened. "I am not refusing. I am attempting to identify myself." He slowly moved his right hand toward the inside pocket of his suit jacket, a movement he had performed thousands of times to retrieve his wallet. "Don't reach!" Vance screamed. He didn't wait for compliance. He lunged. Vance grabbed Thorne's right wrist with a crushing grip, twisting it violently behind Thorne's back. The motion was intended to off-balance a suspect, and it worked. Thorne, caught off guard by the sudden violence, stumbled forward. Vance used the momentum to slam the older man chest first onto the rental counter. The sound of the impact, a sickening thud of bone against laminate, echoed through the lobby. "Stop resisting," Vance yelled, playing to the camera he knew was recording, creating a justification for his force. "I am not resisting," Thorne gasped. The wind knocked out of him. His cheek was pressed against the cold counter. "You are making a mistake. I am a senior analyst with the FBI. Check my pocket." "Shut up." Vance grabbed Thorne's other arm, wrenching it back with unnecessary force. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt and ratcheted them onto Thorne's wrists, tightening them until the metal bit into the skin. The lobby was silent. Sterling watched from the back, his mouth open, realizing he had started an avalanche he couldn't stop. A couple entering the front door froze, pulling out their phones to record. Thorne didn't struggle. He didn't kick. He stood up slowly when Vance yanked him upright. His suit was rumpled, his glasses were crooked, and his dignity had been assaulted, but his mind was crystal clear. He looked Vance directly in the eyes. "My credentials are in my inner left pocket," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "You have just assaulted a federal officer. You have detained me without probable cause. I strongly suggest you verify my identity before you put me in that car." Vance laughed. It was a nervous, arrogant sound. "I'll verify you downtown, buddy. Impersonating a federal agent. That's a felony. Let's go." He shoved Thorne toward the door, parading him past the witnesses, past the terrified manager, and out into the bright, unforgiving morning sun. The back of a police cruiser is a cage designed to strip away humanity. It smells of stale sweat vomit and industrial disinfectant. The hard plastic seat offers no comfort. For Marcus Thorne, sitting with his hands cuffed behind his back, the physical discomfort was secondary to the professional calculation he was running in his head. As Vance drove toward the central precinct, the radio crackling with routine chatter, Thorne remained silent. He didn't beg. He didn't threaten. He simply memorized. He memorized the time, 10:52 a.m. He memorized the route. He memorized the officer's erratic lane changes. He was building a case file in his mind, organizing the evidence just as he would for a counterterrorism operation. Vance glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting the suspect to be yelling or pleading. The silence unnerved him. "Quiet back there, huh? Thinking of a better lie than I'm with the FBI?" Thorne met his eyes in the mirror. "I'm thinking about your pension, Officer Vance, and how it's about to disappear." Vance slammed on the brakes slightly harder than necessary at the next red light. "Keep talking. I'll add threatening an officer to the charge sheet." They arrived at the precinct 10 minutes later. Vance pulled into the sally port, the heavy garage doors rolling down behind them. He hauled Thorne out of the car, gripping his bicep like a trophy catch. They walked through the booking intake, past the holding cells, and up to the main desk. The watch commander on duty was Sergeant Thomas Miller. Miller was 58 years old, a 30-year veteran who had seen everything. He was tired, he was close to retirement, and he had a low tolerance for incompetence. He looked up from his paperwork as Vance wrestled Thorne toward the bench. Miller's eyes narrowed. He saw the expensive suit. He saw the demeanor. He saw a man who didn't fit the profile of the usual Thursday morning disorderly conduct arrest. "What do you have, Vance?" Miller asked, leaning back in his chair. "Trespassing, resisting, and impersonation," Vance announced proudly. "Guy wouldn't leave a rental place, then tried to tell me he's a Fed." Miller looked at Thorne. He saw the calm, burning intelligence in the man's eyes. He felt a prickle of warning at the base of his neck. "Sir," Miller said to Thorne, respectful by habit. "Name, Marcus Thorne," he replied clearly. "Senior Intelligence Analyst, Federal Bureau of Investigation. My credentials are in my inner jacket pocket along with my PIV card. Officer Vance refused to check them before assaulting me." Vance rolled his eyes. "Sarge, he's full of it. He was loitering at a rental counter." Miller stood up. He walked around the desk. "Vance, shut your mouth." He approached Thorne. "May I?" "Please," Thorne said. Miller reached into the jacket pocket. His fingers brushed the fine silk lining. He pulled out a black leather credential case. He opened it. The gold seal of the Department of Justice caught the fluorescent light. The photo was clearly Thorne. The title was Bold Senior Intelligence Analyst, Top Secret/SCI Clearance. Miller felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at the ID, then at Thorne, then at Vance. He closed the case and held it up to Vance's face, his hand shaking slightly with rage. "Is this the fake ID, Vance?" Miller whispered, his voice deadly quiet. "Is this the impersonation?" Vance squinted at it. "It looks real, but anyone can buy those online." "It's real, you idiot," Miller roared, the sound echoing through the booking area. "I've worked with the task force. I know what these look like. You just arrested a federal agent." Miller turned to the computer and punched in the badge number. It took 3 seconds. The screen flashed red with a restricted access warning, confirming the identity and flagging the query for immediate notification to the Bureau. Miller looked at Vance with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Uncuff him. Now." The sound of the handcuffs unlocking was the loudest noise in the room. Vance's hands were trembling so badly he fumbled with the key twice. When the metal finally clicked open, Thorne brought his hands forward. His wrists were bruised, deep red welts forming where the metal had dug in. He rubbed them slowly, grimacing, but his composure remained absolute. "Agent Thorne," Sergeant Miller said, his voice wavering, "I can't tell you how sorry I am. This is a catastrophic failure of procedure." Thorne adjusted his cuffs. He straightened his tie. He put his glasses back on. He looked like a titan returning to his full height. He ignored Vance completely, treating him as if he had ceased to exist. He focused solely on the sergeant. "Sergeant Miller," Thorne said, "I need the use of a secure phone. I need to contact the special agent in charge at the Charlotte field office. And I need the name of this officer's union representative because he is going to need one." "Yes, sir. Right here, sir." Miller pushed a phone across the desk. Vance stood there pale and sweating. "Sarge, The manager said, 'Give me your badge, Vance,'" Miller said, not even looking at him. "What badge? Gun on the desk. You're done for the day. Probably done forever. Go sit in the break room and don't talk to anyone until Internal Affairs gets here." Within 45 minutes, the precinct was swarming. 2 black SUVs pulled up to the entrance. 4 men in suits, actual field agents, walked in. They weren't there to arrest anyone. They were there to collect their colleague and ensure the documentation of the incident was preserved. The power dynamic had shifted so violently that the air in the station felt thin. Meanwhile, at Apex Rentals, the consequences were arriving with equal speed. Thorne had made one other call to the corporate headquarters of the rental agency. He hadn't demanded anything. He had simply stated the facts. "I was profiled by your manager. I was falsely reported. I was arrested." By 1:00 p.m., a district manager walked into the Apex lobby. Brett Sterling was called out of the back office. He was fired on the spot for violation of corporate anti-discrimination policies and for making a false police report. He was escorted off the property, leaving his keys on the counter where he had watched Marcus Thorne just hours before. Sterling walked to his car unemployed and facing potential criminal charges for the false report, his hero moment having turned into a total self-destruction. The wheels of justice grind slow, but when they are greased with a $4.1 million lawsuit, they can move with surprising efficiency. The city of Charlotte knew they couldn't win. The evidence was overwhelming. The 911 call recording proved Sterling lied. The body camera footage proved Vance lied. The witnesses in the lobby provided video of a calm man being assaulted by an aggressive officer. The lawsuit, Thorne versus City of Charlotte, named Officer Derek Vance, the police department, and the rental agency. It alleged unlawful arrest, excessive force, racial profiling, and violation of civil rights. The discovery phase threatened to expose not just Vance's history, but the department's habit of ignoring red flags. Vance had 7 prior complaints for similar behavior profiling minority suspects, escalating nonviolent situations, and he had been cleared every time by a review board that rubber-stamped his aggression. To avoid a public trial that would have dissected the department's internal affairs process on national television, the city settled. The figure was $4.1 million. Apex Rentals settled separately for an undisclosed amount rumored to be in the high 6 figures. Derek Vance was fired 3 weeks after the incident. The Fraternal Order of Police declined to fight for his reinstatement after the body cam footage was leaked to the press. He was stripped of his certification, ensuring he would never work as a police officer in the state again. Marcus Thorne remained with the FBI. He didn't retire on the settlement money, though he could have. He went back to work because he believed in the mission. But he was different. The quiet confidence was still there, but it was guarded now. He drove a new car bought with his own money, and he avoided rental counters. On quiet evenings, he would look at the faint scars on his wrists. He was a man who protected the nation, a man with the highest clearance the government could grant a man of wealth and education. And yet on a Thursday morning in October, none of that had mattered. To Officer Vance and Manager Sterling, he was just a black man standing in the wrong place. The money was in the bank, but the lesson was burned into his soul. Legitimacy is a fragile thing, often granted or revoked at the whim of the most ignorant person in the room with a badge. How many others, Thorne wondered, had stood at that counter or walked down that street without an FBI credential in their pocket? How many lives had Vance destroyed before he picked the wrong victim? We must ask ourselves, why do we allow systems to protect officers with patterns of bias until it costs millions to stop them? And what happens to the citizens who cannot fight back? If this story moved you, please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Do you think officers should carry personal liability insurance for misconduct? Subscribe for more stories that bring the truth to light.